My name is Amelia Bennett. I have been getting stalked for the past 7 years. The first time when I noticed about getting stalked, I told police about it, but they could find anything, and I thought that I'm imagining things. I was walking home from office when I first noticed someone following me. I turned around and no one was there, so I ran to my house and locked the door from inside, because I had no idea if he or she followed me to my home or not. By the next day, I forgot about it, and when I was taking a shower, someone started ringing the doorbell. I thought if I don't open the door, they will leave, but the doorbell kept ringing. I immediately got out of the bathroom, dressed up, and went to open the door. It was still ringing. I opened the gate in frustration, but no one was there. Instead, there was a small package on my door. After picking it up, I locked the door again. I opened the package and there was a picture of me holding a beer and sitting on the bar counter. There was a note inside as well. I opened it and it said, "You look hot as hell, my Amelia." I panicked. The incident from yesterday started to rewind itself in my mind. I immediately called 911 and reported it. They told me to calm down and they will look into it. For the next few days, there was no other package that I received, but wherever I went, I felt like someone's following me, and every time I turned around to check, I found no one. Few months passed and the police couldn't find anyone. They told me that the gift must be from someone I know, and I may have gotten scared by my own imagination. No matter what I do, I couldn't help but think that he must be around me every time. I could never see the face of the stalked, but sometimes I saw a guy with a plum jacket with a picture of Black Snake over it. My friends started to worry about me and told me date. Their solution was you can get romance and protection at the same time, but I wasn't ready to date. I started receiving more packages, and it all contained some dirty, cheap lines. One time I received a bra and the note said, "Your breasts would look amazing in this, my Amelia." His every letter contained the word "my Amelia" in them, and it was creepy. I was at work thinking about these things when my friend came looking all worried. They asked me if I'm okay. I told them about the situation, and their solution, as always, was to date. They dragged me to a nearby coffee shop and we started talking about office and made fun of our boss. I got distracted from the stalker for that period of time. That was when I took a sip of my coffee and noticed it wasn't my order. I remembered there was another guy whose order was with me. I had already taken a sip, so I thought I should let it be. But my friends forced me to go there, saying the boy is cute. I went there and apologized. Surprisingly, he exchanged the trays without even saying anything. I was talking with my friend when one of them pointed, "Look, that cute guy is leaving. You should totally exchange numbers. Go and say you want to pay for his Americano." I denied, but they practically forced me to. I went there and asked for his number hesitantly. He gave it to me and left. We went back to work. Before leaving, my friends reminded me to call him, and I took their advice. I called him and let him know my number. I didn't know what else to say, so I disconnected the call. The following evening, I received another package with letter. I was distressed. That's when I thought of my friends telling me that a boyfriend can protect me. I dialed the number of that boy and started talking to him. His name was Daniel Park. He seemed nice, easygoing, so I started to like him. One day when I was leaving from the library, I noticed someone following me. I couldn't see him, but I was still terrified. I immediately called Daniel for help. He told me he was nearby, and I felt a bit relieved. When he came, I asked him to walk me home, and when we reached, I called him because I was still scared. I told him my story, and at the heat of the moment, I ended up having sex with him, and it felt as if I forgot about the stalker completely. After that, every time stalker made a move, I called Daniel over. But as time passed by, I started noticing things about Daniel which were similar to the stalker. One time, while we were having sex, he accidentally called me my Amelia, but after that, he never called me that, as if he was being careful about it. Another incident that I noticed recently was when I was talking to him about Stalker. He jokingly said, "What if he is just your secret admirer?" I felt weird, but the thing that made me even more doubtful towards him was his handwriting, which was identical to the handwriting of the stalkers. Today, when I was in my garden, I noticed the stalker placing something outside my house. I hid and took a picture. When I zoomed in, I noticed the tattoo on the back of his palm. Daniel had the exact same tattoo. I called Daniel telling him about the stalker and asked him to come over. After that, I called 911 and told them about the picture of the stalker. Daniel was on his way to my house, and so was the police. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. This happened a few years ago, and sometimes I still have nightmares about not getting away. Let me start off by saying that I live in a pretty big city. Lots of bars and clubs, and I have experience with partying and drugs. I have been in blackout drunk situations, and this was not that. But I no longer go out on my own. That night, I decided to go out with some friends bar hopping. I mainly knew only one of the girls that I hung out with regularly, and the other two were more acquaintances. I was very outgoing and loved meeting people, so that was nothing new for me. We had a few drinks at a bar and continued on to the next one. We were having fun and a great time when one of the girls I didn't know well pulled out the party stuff sometime during our second bar visit. I decided to skip it because I wasn't looking to get messed up that night. But my friend said yes, and she and the third girl went to the bathroom. The second girl, let's call her Bob, kept insisting I go with the two others. I kept declining, but she got a little aggressive. After the third time I'd said no, my friend came back from the bathroom and Bob acted like nothing had just happened. Then we met some guys who joined our group to have a flirt. And I was in a relationship, but my friend and Bob weren't. By the time the second girl had left and Bob and my friend was starting to get pretty messed up, I went to use the bathroom and texted my boyfriend that I was coming home soon, but saw that my phone was dead. When I came back to the table, the guys had given his shots. I was still pretty sober and declined the shot, but Bob shoved the shot into my hand, so to avoid a scene, I took it. I then went to tell my friend that I was heading home, but I took one look at hers and Bob's faces and I could see they were out of it. I was starting to feel pretty woozy myself at that point, so I grabbed all our stuff and started shoving them to go. The guys that bought the shots were protesting, but I wasn't getting any resistance from the girls. I hailed a cab, my phone was dead. So, no Uber, and I remembered putting the girls in the back and telling the driver that we were dropping them off first, then going to my address. During the journey, I blacked out, but I remember dropping off my friend. Then I blacked out again and was alone with the driver. I was in the front seat and he was holding my hand. I looked around disoriented. I took in the sight of him holding my hand whilst driving, like he was my boyfriend or something. I saw my wallet in the center cup holder and the meter was off. He was telling me that he was taking me to a romantic place, but I told him no, and to please take me home as my boyfriend was waiting for me. He then said something along the lines of "Stop talking about him. I told you," which in hindsight indicates that I had told him already many times about him. He said he just wanted to pretend for a little and held my hand tighter. I didn't want to trigger a violent reaction, so I let my hand where it was and started to reach for my wallet with my other. He saw me let go of my hand and took my wallet from the cup holder to his other side where I couldn't reach it. I was still woozy and blacked out again. And when I came to my senses, we were parked near a very well-known romantic and touristy location in my city. Normally, this place was packed, but not that night. It's pretty far from anything else and surrounded by woods. I started to cry and begged him to please take me home because I wanted to see my boyfriend and that I would tell anyone what he was doing. He looked at me and said, "I will take you home if you pretend you are my girlfriend for a little while." I sat there in shock, wishing my brain wasn't much. I wished, in fact, that I had never gone out in the first place. I wished I could see my boyfriend for the 1,000th time that night. I said okay, and he smiled, put my wallet back in the cup holder, and I took it slowly, putting it under my leg. He took my hand and looked out the front window and out into the little lake that he had brought me to. He then started talking, but I don't remember what he was saying. I was just trying not to black out again. I waited for him to look at me and asked again for him to please take me home. He said only if I let him give me a kiss. I said no. He looked mad for a fraction of a second, and then squeezed the hand was still holding. He then leaned in fast and kissed me anyway, but I kept my lips sealed tight against him, ready to fight, ready to bite and scratch and not go down easily. He let go of my hand and backed away. Then started the car, and we finally began our way back to civilization. I was crying as silently as possible, trying not to be heard, so he would forget I was there and not touch me. I waited until we were near enough people that I could bolt out of the car and find another way home. But I think he saw me grabbing my wallet from under my leg and knew my intention to jump out at the next light. He snatched it again and said he would drive me. So I nodded, as by then I didn't care about the wallet, my phone, or anything else. I just needed to jump out no matter what, as I was going to get home. I had no clue what time it was by then either. But I do know there was almost no cars out of my usual busy city, no buses and no people. But I didn't care anymore. He eventually stopped at a red light, and I unlocked the door, yanked it open, ran, and didn't look back. But I heard a car peel out of the intersection, and he was running to my phone, still dead. No wallet, so no money, and really far from the house. I was still drowsy and crying, and I had no idea of the time. I started walking then, when I heard a car pull up near me. I started running instinctively when I heard a woman's voice yell out, "Are you okay?" I stopped and turned around to the most beautiful person I have ever seen in the entire world, walking towards me slowly with her hands out in front as not to scare me. I started crying harder, being the most incoherent that I've ever been. She hugged me so hard and asked for my boyfriend's number so she could call him. He answered straight away, and she told him where I was and that I was okay, and she was bringing me home. I cried the whole way back, trying to explain what had happened, but still woozy, still freaking out. It was hard. So we drove in relative silence. When we got home, my boyfriend was waiting outside, losing his mind. My savior gave me a phone number to call her when I felt better and drove off. It was 5 a.m., and I'd left the bar at 10. That's all I can remember a week later, and my wallet showed up in my mailbox.
I was 17 at that time, and I need to give you a little background. It was 80s and before cell phones. I'm a female, and I had a best friend at my high school who I'll call C for short. C and I met when her brother asked me to be his girlfriend, and she didn't like me at first. She would walk around me and taunt me, but once I stood up to her, she began to respect me and then got to know me properly. How? Because I knew her and her brother. It was a very short-lived romance. I spent a lot of time hanging around at their house, and C also had a young twin brothers, her mom and her older male cousin who lived in the house. Over the time I became close friends with the family, and her mother even offered me a job. She sold beautiful clothes via fashion shows and asked me to be a model. I really enjoyed that job and the friendship I made. Then one night, she asked me to spend the night, which I hadn't done before, so I said yes. but I couldn't get a ride to her house until it was already pretty late, and my ride dropped me off, and rather than waiting to see if I got in safely, just drove away. Walking up to the house, it was completely dark and quiet, and when I knocked, no one came to the door. I knocked again, and still nothing. I was stuck there and had to get someone to wake up and let me in. And I was beginning to get scared. There were a couple of other houses on the street, but for some reason, they were all dark and quiet too. I walked about a quarter of a mile down the dark, deserted street to a payphone, and I dialed C's number. After several rings, she eventually answered and unlocked the door for me. As I walked back to her house from the phone booth, she went back to the bed, and I went into the house. It was as dark as quiet inside as it was outside, and I made my way to her room, where I thought I was going to be sleeping, but she had fallen back to sleep and locked her bedroom door. Her young twin brothers were still awake and invited me to sleep in their room, as they had 2 sets of bunk beds, so each twin had his own bed with an extra for the older cousin. I didn't see the other brother, my former boyfriend, that night at all. That was a fine situation for me, as I liked the twins, who were about 9 years old. So I lay in one of the bottom bunks, and I was ready to sleep. The boys were talking like kids do, and they were fine, but the older cousin was in there as well, I believe in the bunk above me. But they never turned on the light, so I wasn't really sure. Now, while the twins talked and giggled about nothing, the cousin, who was at least 20, maybe older, began making very inappropriate comments to me, which in pitch blackness was all the more unsettling, because I couldn't see where he even was in the room. At first, I ignored him, thinking he was just being a dick. But he persisted. It didn't matter to him that the 2 young boys were in the same room either, and he got more and more explicit in saying the things he wanted to do with me. I was really creeped out by this point, but I still didn't think he would actually do anything. I kept asking him to stop talking to me like that, but he wouldn't. It just escalated, and I couldn't tell he was going to leave me alone. So I finally got up and walked out of the room, still in the dark, and I made my way to my friend's room right across the hall. I knocked on her bedroom door. When she didn't make a sound, I could see that C was a very deep sleeper, and her door was still locked. This entire time, the cousin kept talking and scaring me, and as I frantically tried to wake my friend, he began getting out of his bunk and coming towards the hall where I was. I had to do something fast. For some reason, C's mom wasn't home that night, but since I had spent so much precious time in that house, I knew it pretty well. I knew that there was a den right there next to the room that I had been in with the boys, and I knew that den door was locked. Just as the cousin reached me in the hallway, I screamed a little, ran into the den and slammed the door in his face, immediately turning the lock all in one motion. That room was even darker, so the first thing I wanted to do was to turn on the light, but I couldn't find one anywhere. I searched for the light because I wanted to push something else in front of the door, knowing that the little door lock was not a strong one. But I couldn't find light anywhere, and within about 2 minutes, I could hear the cousin fiddling with the locks. He got it open so fast, he might as well have used a key. So now He had me where he wanted me, and he quickly closed and relocked the door. We were now completely alone in the dark room, with nowhere around to stop him. The twins had stayed in their beds throughout, and there was nothing they could have done anyway. This guy then very quickly grabbed me towards him, putting one hand over my mouth and nose so I could neither scream nor breathe very well. His other hand went right between my legs, and he was touching me in my most private place, as I was at his mercy and barely breathing. He quietly said things in my ears as I struggled to breathe and somehow defend myself. He was behind me, and his arms were wrapped around mine in such a way that I couldn't use them. I'd been in a similar situation with a man in my not-so-distant past, so this time I was angry. I did not want to do this to happen to me again. He went on for a few minutes, which seemed like an eternity. And just when I thought I'd run out of hope, miraculously, there was a knock on the door of the den. It was my friend C. She hadn't woken up when I was pounding on her bedroom door, but some kind of divine interventions had somehow caused her to wake up now. "What's going on in there?" she asked. The man tightened his grip on my mouth and nose so they couldn't make a sound. And he said to her, "We're okay, we're okay." And here I tried all my might to at least make some kind of sound. But since I couldn't get a breath in, I couldn't manage it. I will forever be eternally grateful for my friend C at that moment, as she didn't just go back to the bed thinking I was messing around with her cousin. Instead, she said that she wanted to hear me say I was okay, and that's when the cousin knew he had lost and let go of me. I immediately screamed, "Help me!" and I ran into her bedroom with her following behind me. She then closed and locked the bedroom door. I was gasping for air, crying and trying to tell her everything that had happened. She had trouble calming me down, as I was still terrified, and I told her that he could pick her lock if he wanted to and would come in and get me. She promised that she wouldn't let that happen, and much later I was somehow able to fall asleep. In the morning, I woke up instantly, afraid of remembering what had happened the night before, and C wasn't in the room with me. I panicked for a moment, thinking the cousin was still somewhere in the house, but after a moment, I had my friend talking with her mom, who had arrived back home. I joined them at the table and learned that C had already filled her mom in on everything. Her mom told me she was sorry about what had happened, and that morning she had already thrown the cousin out of the house, and that he would never be allowed to come back. At that moment, I had been certain I was going to report it, as I hadn't reported my previous assault, because I felt like it had somewhat been my fault, and I didn't want anyone to find out about it. I was still struggling with the decision, but this time I was angry, and I did not deserve to have that happen to me. These people had felt like my second family for a while, and that mom was my boss at the job I enjoyed very much. I didn't want to hurt them, and I certainly didn't want to jeopardize my relationship with the mom and my job. The most important thing was, though, is this time I knew none of it had been my fault, and I knew my worth. I realized that no matter what a woman does, nothing gave a man the right to force himself upon her. And I had gained quite a bit of strength through this experience. So the point was not whether I'd reported the incident or not. I'm going to leave that part up to you, the reader, to decide. To all women, even men, that I recommend carrying a pepper spray in a stun gun, as I do it now. I won't get into discussion about guns, but you can still stop an attacker, even a dog or a bear, even from a distance of up to 4 yards with pepper spray, and up close you can disable them with a stun gun and get away safely without killing anyone. My wish for everyone listening this is to please stay safe and be aware of your surroundings.